talked previously in the introduction about the S.E.M. ensemble as far as how it happened, how it started, why, and what was the mainly musical background. There was no other background. There was no other reason for us to get together and do what we started to do. And now I should talk a little bit about the 70s. It is sort of an interesting thing because in the course of the years, one can more or less divide what we were doing and how did we do it by decades. More or less the 70s, then the 80s, then the 90s, and now 2000, 2010s. Really. So of course not exactly, but more or less. So we got together 50 years ago in 1970 to do a program of music which we didn't think we could really incorporate into the center of the creative and performing arts, of which we were all members. We were always at the beginning, of course very small, but the core setup were always 4 people. It started with all of us from the center, myself, Jan Williams, Julius Eastman, Roberto Lanieri, who was a clarinet player, member of the center. Roberto left, I think right following year, and we asked a composer and performer, Garrett List, to more or less replace him. So we were performing in the early 70s, Julius Eastman, Garrett List, Jan Williams, and myself. So we were more or less 4 or 5 musicians performing our music and music of others which we thought we should be doing. One of them was John Cage. Another composer was obviously Feldman, because Feldman was with us in Buffalo, and we saw each other very often and maintained sort of a social and professional contact. The environment, the relationships between the creative associates was very, very nice, very open. People got to see each other. And one of those getting together was with Julius Eastman for myself, who came and said, I would like to show you my music. Right away, it was clear to me that we are going to be working together closely. I mentioned in the introduction my distance from the music making that emanated from Darmstadt ideas, serialism, the music which was then regarded as avant-garde. And here I am with Julius, who is playing a recording of his music for me. And I never forget that first impression I had. It was a piece for 5 trumpets. I think there were 5 trumpets. It was called Trumpets. A piece which is more or less based on C major triad. I have listened to a lot of music, and I met a lot of people. It must have made very deep impression on me, because I remember this encounter now as if it would be yesterday. I don't remember that many other encounters like this. Before I came, I had an ensemble in Prague, which was called Quarks Ensemble. It was a name which didn't mean anything. In fact, I don't like names for entities like ensembles, which has some meaning, because then one is stuck with the meaning. We came up with the Quarks Ensemble by cutting out letters, putting them in the hat, pulling them out, and QUAX came out, and that was the name. I tried that again, and it didn't work. No imitation works. So nothing nothing came out which came close to the name Quarks. QUAX. At that time, one of my friends, Cornelius Cardew, had a group in London, AMM, and I liked that title very much for the group. Also, because nobody really knew, and they never told anyone, the meaning of AMM. Maybe it had no meaning as well. AMM. And so I took the word ensemble, took the middle 3 syllables, S.E.M, put a period after that, and I had a name. That's how it originated. It means nothing, or it means, no, it means S.E.M ensemble. It means that thing which we do. We started to play together more and more regularly, and Julius started to compose pieces which we were performing, and the same thing was true for me. The problem I had was that Julius was mainly a singer. He was a pianist also, but he didn't pursue life as a pianist. He was mainly a singer. In fact, he was part of the center as a singer, mostly, and composer. And I have never composed anything for voice. Well, Julius had an amazing voice, almost 3 octaves, from bass to high notes, very high notes, amazing voice. So I took that as normal. I never worked with any other singer. And I wrote these 5 short segments for voice and instruments, and the piece is called There Is Singularly Nothing, because the start of the text I'm using by Gertrude Stein starts, the sentence starts, there is singularly nothing in it. That's the title of the piece.
oneself interesting, oneself in an equilibration. That of course means words as well as things, and distribution as well as between themselves, between the words and themselves, and the thing and themselves. A distribution as distribution. This makes what follows, and now there is every reason why there should be an arrangement made.
One of the composers, I knew very few people coming to America from Czechoslovakia, from Prague, and we are talking about 1970, so we're talking about months after coming here. I had no time to meet many people, especially being in Buffalo, only my friends at the center. But John Cage was somebody whom I knew already many years. I had a very interesting relationship with Cage. We met in Vienna, 1964. He came to perform with Mise, Cunningham and the company as part of the world tour. And now I had never seen music. I knew who he was. And of course, I read some of his texts. We performed, 6 of us, with David Tudor and Friedrich Zerha and other people in Vienna. We performed Atlas Eclipticalis, percussion, 6 percussion parts in a 3-hour version. That was my introduction to Cage's music. What is also interesting is that for this 3-hour-long performance, we have a 9-minute rehearsal. That was it. Cage did not like rehearsals. Cage hated rehearsals for some reason. What is interesting about my relationship with Cage in those Buffalo years, in my Buffalo years, is that I saw him very often. I would be going to New York almost every month, and my being in New York itself was enough of a reason to call Cage and stop by. If I would be living, I'm thinking about it, if I would be living in New York, I would never see him that often. Would be no reason. There would be some reason sometime, but not that often. And I came in the summer of 70, and I'm calling Cage that I'm there, and he said, I can't see you this time, I'm working against the deadline. And that was in the summer. When I came, could be September, so right in the fall, I called Cage again, and I stopped by. He was then living in it was his first loft in Bank Street. The whole place was covered with pieces of music. And I asked, what is it? And it was songbooks. He was finishing songbooks. The deadline was finishing the songbooks. Songbooks was written for 2 singers, Kathy Berberian and Simone Rice, as a series of compositions that one puts together overlappingly for as many as 10, 12, 15 people, or just 1 or 2. And it corresponded so much with what I was doing. as a concept of music, that I was immediately interested in that piece. And so the S.E.M. Ensemble started to perform songbooks before it was published, before anybody else. In fact, we had here in the archive, S.E.M. Ensemble, the pre-published edition of the whole piece. And we had a conversation about it that also very much influenced my thinking about the piece in general. And he said, well, I'm trying to perform the piece in Carnegie Recital Hall. Now it's called Weill Recital Hall, with Kathy Berberian and Simone Rice. And they want, you see, this is all about anarchy in the sense of independence, complete independence, and I don't want one performer influencing the other performer during rehearsals. And since the material is really independent, there is nothing to rehearse. The piece has to come together during the performance. There should be no rehearsals. And these singers, those two singers, they insist on having a rehearsals. And if they will really insist on it, I will cancel the performance. And the performance never happened. Anyway, I got the music, and S.E.M. Ensemble started to perform songbooks in a series of performances here and in Europe, all over. And we, one of those memorable performances were at Albany, at the University of Albany Music Department. It was one of our performances, but Cage was there. Cage was there several times. David Tudor was there. They were probably performing with Cunningham. I don't remember anymore, but I know that he was there. Talking about songbooks, and of course talking about the performance in 1975 at the June in Buffalo, I have to go a little bit into all the details around it, because it has become almost an infamous event, with a lot of people talking about this without knowing what they are talking about. This gives me an opportunity to put the record straight. I mentioned my early encounter with songbooks, where stage absolutely resolutely stated that there should be no rehearsals. Not only that, a performance which he was preparing did not happen because the performers insisted on rehearsing. So when we did the performances, up until June in Buffalo, there were never rehearsals. Everybody prepared his own program of set of solos, and the piece happened during the performance on the stage. None of us really knew what the other person, what the other musician is going to do. The next thing is, although Julius didn't perform with us anymore, I was really convinced that one of the reasons we were asked to do it was Julius Eastman, so I didn't want to misrepresent the situation and show up without Julius. He accepted, and that was the situation. I never asked him what he's going to do because it was not necessary. It was never necessary to ask anyone, I thought. He walked out of the S.E.M. ensemble because he started to pursue, musically speaking, a life very different from what we did and what we were continuing to do. He connected with jazz, focused musicians. Some of them played only jazz. He connected with his brother, who was coming from that kind of a background and played the bass, etc. I think he stopped singing, more or less. He started to play the piano again or do performances. So he picked up a solo. I don't recall the number, but the solo consisted of just a suggestion, or one sentence, do a disciplined act. And in his mind, that meant more or less whatever he decides to do. That was already, on his part, misunderstanding what discipline is, a discipline act. I think, in a funny way, this was the worst solo he could have chosen. And in his discipline act, he prepared an act which turned, again, into trio, not a solo. He brought man and a woman on the stage that he would undress in front of the audience as a species. I talked to him about it. Nothing to do with sex, nothing to do with anything. Just that that's what he thought would be the discipline act. He brought these men and women, he brought this couple on. And it was a serious performance. The hall was full with people. We were doing all sorts of various things. And in the middle of it, on the stage, Julius is with this girl and a man, woman and a man, trying to undress them. The girl freaked out and refused to be undressed. So he gave up and undressed only the man and made all sorts of gestures which could have been interpreted. I was performing, I didn't watch it closely, but I don't think it had anything to do with homosexuality or anything. It just happened that unfortunately the young woman didn't refuse to go along, instead stood on the stage, and the young man did. I never saw these two people before or after. And it caused enormous uproar. It was a sort of memorable experience or performance for those who were there. Well, Cage took it very personally, got really insulted. And when the performance ended, it was about an hour long, he stormed on the stage. He stormed, came to me and said, what was the meaning of this? What is going on? And I said, well, we didn't have a rehearsal. I have no idea what is going to happen. And he said, but you are the director, you are responsible, and left. And this really was an enormous shock for me. And it took a while for me to work it out. And I did work it out. And in the end, I had to admit that he was right. That I was the director of the S.E.M. Ensemble, and I was responsible for whatever was going on under the flag, under the name of the ensemble in our performance. So this had a profound influence on me, and this had a profound influence on the S.E.M. Ensemble, the way we would continue working. It did not create a rift between me and Julius at all. It was a very, very, I would say, very useful crisis. A crisis can be very useful or not that much. This one was, definitely. As a footnote, I should add, some 5-6 years afterwards, 1982, we were asked to do songbooks again. And I said, yes, fine, we'll do it. Only under the condition that not only we were going to rehearse, but John Cage is going to come to the rehearsal. And he actually accepted, and he came to the rehearsal, and we did it in 82. I should backtrack a little bit to mention one thing. S.E.M. Ensemble was a group adjacent to the center until a quite substantial European tour at the beginning of 1972. That was still with Roberto Lanieri, 4 of us, Jan Williams, myself, and Julius. So what I wanted to say is that we were doing here a concert, there a concert. But the tour in January, February, the tour lasted several weeks with major concerts in Germany, and then the last concert was in Geneva. Really reconstituted it puts us together. We return, I think we return thinking about ourselves as a really group which can do things. This tour followed many other tours to France, Belgium, with Julius, and then we were preparing ourselves for another major tour when Julius decided not to perform with us anymore. It was a big shock for all of us, But it never led to any kind of bad or hard feelings. We remained it. In fact, we occasionally performed after he left, and we also performed his music. One of the performances which happened was the Songbook's performance at June in Buffalo in the spring of '75. In the next season, '75-'76, we asked Julius to perform his music with his musician on our series at the Albert Knox Art Gallery, where we had a series of concerts every year. So that was the situation. Then, shortly afterwards, Julius moved to New York, and we saw each other not that often. What it meant for me, what it meant for the ensemble, was a slight change of repertoire, but mainly the question for me was, am I going to compose music for voices, because my singer was Julius. And I tried to solve that problem by finding different singers. So I thought, okay, either I find new singers or I'll stop composing for voice. And finding singers who would be able to and interested to collaborate with me in Buffalo was out of question. So the place to look was New York City. Charlie Morrow, a composer living in New York then, recommended singers from vocal ensemble, the Western Wind, and I started to collaborate with these singers, and it culminated in that big piece, Many, Many Women, which followed, which was followed by even larger piece for more voices, Explorations in the Geometry of Thinking on text by Buckminster Fuller. Many, Many Women was still Gertrude Stein.
Energy has either radiation or matter is the summa frequency. Local universe, aberration and palpitation of comprehensive gravity, embracement be washed overboard. Energy manifests itself as the palpitating gravity tolerated, aberrational pulsings through of the plurality of exact centers of pure principles, and describing this plurality of principles.
When I think of the 70s, and this thought just occurred to me now, and it seems the year 1973 was extremely important for many reasons, which gave impetus to a lot of things which came up and happened during the 70s up until early 80s. Number one, it was the further working with voices on my part as a composer. texts and voices. As I learned English better and better, I became more and more interested in Gertrude Stein, the texts, then later Buckminster Fuller. In about middle 70s, I started to be more interested in the content than the form. Gertrude Stein is really form. The content is extremely important at some time, at times. But the form is there all the time. In 1973, I got a call from Museum of Modern Art, which was preparing the first retrospective exhibit of Marcel Duchamp. And they called me to Buffalo, and they said, we are junior council, I think, of the museum was preparing a whole day of events, and they wanted to have a concert, and somebody recommended Petr Kotik. Call Petr Kotik, he will do a concert which would fit this thing. And so I come to New York very shortly afterwards, and I thought, what are we going to do? I knew that there was a piece connected with Duchamp by David Behrman, John Cage, and I had this idea, that idea, and as usual, I ended up sitting with Cage in his Bank Street place. And I mentioned that, and I thought, I asked for advice. What do you think? And Cage says, well, when you do this, why don't you perform music by Duchamp? I said, he did music? Yeah, he composed very early on in 1912, 1913. And he went somewhere and brought a book, and there was a score of this piece for three voices. The bride stripped bare by her bachelor's even Erratum musicale. And it's a method or system how to compose music using chants, also a sort of a scores in numbers for mechanical piano, and a drawing. How you need an apparatus for creating the music. And he called the Museum of Modern Art, and he arranged for me to get a copy of it because it was to be exhibited at the show. And I became immensely interested in it, and in fact I made a model based on the Duchamp drawing of this apparatus. And I did that also, again, without any plan, just out of interest. We performed the music, and suddenly it became a big draw for the ensemble to be engaged. and performed that, and consequently we recorded it, etc. So that was another 1973. And then another thing was an idea I had to do in New Hampshire, in a place called Chocorua, in a place in Chocorua called Stafford's in the Field, which was sort of an inn, old, very old, maybe going back to 18th century, with a lot of little houses to be rented to people to spend some time in the summer. And I got this idea when I was invited. We were going there for the summer for several weeks to the mountains, and Christian Wolff, being around the corner in Vermont, did a Burdocks festival, and I was invited to perform there, which I did, and coming back from the Burdock Festival, I looked at Stafford's in the Field, and I thought, oh, that would be great to do something like that here. So it was an event which, to everyone's surprise, actually happened. We got a grant from Rockefeller Foundation, which made it possible. Young composers came from all over the country. We had 6 composers in residence. One was David Tudor, Gordon Mummer, David Berman, Julius Eastman, Frederick Rzewski, and myself. So these events in 1973 really influenced, in a major way, the rest of the decade, what we did. And we performed Marcel Duchamp all over, including South America. We started to perform really very intensely my vocal music. And I have to say that throughout that decade, throughout the 70s, up until early 80s, my concern, my focus as a composer was on writing for voices with the texts, with those 2 authors' texts, Gertrude Stein and then Buckminster Fuller. And this was the switch, slow redirecting ourselves from purely Buffalo-based musicians, and that already started with Garrett List, to working with more and more with people from New York, especially all the singers came from New York. They traveled to Buffalo for concerts, and we traveled to New York and then continued to Europe. And in the end, after series of performances in Europe with all 6 singers, Many, Many Women is a piece for 6 singers and 6 instruments. That led actually to the recording in 1980, which is, as Gertrude Stein says, 1914 was still 19th century. 1980 was still the 70s. 1981 was still the 70s. We recorded the piece, and in New York City was in front of us.